of Parliament, invited guests, the youths of Africa, members of the press, ladies and gentlemen, it is my special honor and privilege to welcome you all to the third intergenerational dialogue. And to start this morning, let me invite for the opening remarks from our host country, Republic of South Africa, the Honorable Buti Manamela, Member of Parliament and Deputy Minister in the Presidency of the Republic of South Africa.
Thank you very much, Program Director, Her Excellency Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma, the African Union Commission Chairperson, Honorable Bethel Nameka Amadi, Pan-African Parliament President, Honorable Aso Mama Malam Issa, the Chairperson of the Pan-African Parliament Caucus on Youth, distinguished guests, and the youth of our continent. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the third intergenerational dialogue with the Pan-African Parliament and the Pan-African youth, aptly themed promoting a culture of good governance for citizens, action for empowerment of young women, as well as youth innovation and entrepreneurship. This, we hope, will take stock of the progress made at a national, regional, and continental level with regards to implementing youth development and empowerment. The third intergenerational dialogue takes place right on the heels of the commemoration of the 39th anniversary of June 16 in South Africa. This is an important historical event that arose the gigantic force that the youth represented in challenging the ugly system of apartheid. The youth of 76 shaped a future for both our country and the whole continent and redefined the terms of struggle and resistance against oppressive and colonial systems. I invite you to the many commemorative festivities that will be taking place from 1 June to mark this important historical event. This dialogue also takes place in the aftermath of isolated incidents of attacks on African nationals in our country. Our government, together with our people, acted swiftly in isolating those who were at the center of this attack and have since maintained stability in our communities. We are more determined as we celebrate Africa Day in a few days to come to continue to build African consciousness and Pan-Africanism amongst our people. In general, everyone within the continent have coexisted and made Africa the biggest and warmest home for its children, and even for those who labeled us as barbarian came to settle here in our continent. If those who are central in creating borders in our continent can succeed in destroying borders in their own continents, we should ask ourselves, why are we failing in doing the same and creating one Africa for all? We will only end this form of violence amongst Africans if we destroy the borders that merely shelter our poverty, our inequality, and our underdevelopment, and strengthen the fears and skepticism that African people will continue to have amongst themselves. In this regard, I'm reminded of the wise words of one of the greatest African statesmen, Kwame Nkrumah, who said, and I quote, "We must unite for economic viability, first of all, and then to recover our mineral wealth in Southern Africa, so that our vast resources and capacity for development will bring prosperity for us and additional benefits for the rest of the continent," close quote. Is it not an irony that as things stand, 50 years later after Nkuruma's words, the mineral wealth of our continent have somewhat benefited and continues to benefit the rest of the world and have remained a curse that invited political instability, violence and dictatorships on the people of the continent? On another occasion, in his seminal book, Revolutionary Path, Nkuruma, a champion of African unity, declared that, and I quote, "No independent African state today by itself has a chance to follow an independent course of economic development, and many of us have tried to do this, have been almost ruined, or have had to return to the fold of the former colonial rulers," close quote. This intergenerational dialogue should be about the reaffirmation of the role that young women and young people in general should play towards African unity and in bringing down the borders that have kept the older generation divided, sometimes even on European terms and conditions, with certain regions referred to as Francophone and others as Anglophone, having nothing to do with Zulu, Swahili, Igbo, Hausa, Somali, or Yoruba. The youth of our continent, constituting 65% of the population, are a catalytic force for the attainment of Agenda 2063, and therefore the deliberations taking place here will be instrumental in placing young people at the center of the continuous development of the African development agenda. Whilst the rest of the world is aging, a youthful Africa has to take advantage of the potential demographic dividend that is brought about by this youth bulge. Let us put books and pens in the hands of young people to educate and skill them for a better future for Africa, rather than bullets and guns to fight wars decided by the older generations and which further deteriorates our continent. Let us build on the capacity, energy, vigor of young people towards innovation and entrepreneurship to take advantage of the huge need for industrialization and beneficiation of our mineral resources, rather than exporting these resources as raw materials in exchange for arms to fund our own internal and civil wars. The youth rebels we need should be in technology, in entrepreneurship, and in innovation if we are to give true meaning to Agenda 2063. As we meet here today, there are still countries that have yet to ratify or even sign the African Youth Charter, and therefore creating doubt about their commitment to youth development and empowerment. We must insist that we cannot afford a country's commitment to the goals set in Agenda 2063 when they have not appended their signature on the African Youth Charter. The future of the continent, which is Agenda 2063, begins with the implementation of the basic tenets of the African Youth Charter. Next year marks the 10th anniversary since the Charter was adopted in July 2006 in Banjul by heads of governments. This intergenerational dialogue is, in our view, well placed to begin to lobby for the review of the implementation of the key articles of the African Youth Charter. South Africa is on the verge of adopting a National Youth Policy 2020, whose intention is to tabulate government, civil society, business and young people's goals and commitments towards youth development and empowerment. Just as in many countries in our continent, we are also faced with the triple challenges of poverty, unemployment and inequality, which predominantly affects young people. Through this policy and guided by the African Youth Charter, we have placed at the center of youth development and empowerment issues of the economy, access to education and skills, entrepreneurship, healthy lifestyles, national cohesion and nation building, and strengthening youth development institutions and agencies. In the consultative processes, we have learned greatly that we can never do anything for young people without their direct involvement. We are therefore excited with the premise that this intergenerational dialogue is taking place. We hope that what started in 2013 as an event to mark the 50th anniversary of the AU will not end as a dialogue in such an event, but will lead to total integration of a youth voice in political, economic, and social spaces and institutions in the spirit of nothing for us without us as young people. I wish all the best. I wish you all the best in your deliberations and hope that the outcome of this intergenerational dialogue will take further the agenda of youth development and empowerment, an agenda deeply embedded in the African Youth Charter and Agenda 2063. Once more, on behalf of the South African government, I welcome you to the winter season of our beautiful country, your country too, and hope that you enjoy your stay here and enjoy the African hospitality that Johannesburg is always known for. I thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Ministre. Je m'attendais à ce que
I thank you very much, Honorable Minister. This is the celebrations of the youth and the youth. And I need to hear another round of applause. Excellency, Mr. President of the Pan-African Parliament, I would like, with your permission, all to invite the Honorable Asuma Mamala-Issa, Chairperson of the Pan-African Parliament Caucus on Youth, to deliver his statement.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim.
In the name of Allah.
Dr.
Excellency, Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma, Chairperson of the African Union Commission, Honorable Gebeta Amadi, President of the Pan-African Parliament, Honorable Biti Manamela, Vice President of the Republic of South Africa, ladies and gentlemen, members of the Pan-African Parliament, Honorable MPs, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, representative of the diplomatic corps, Madame Francine Muyumba, Chairperson of the Pan-African Union of Youth, dear brother, Madam Vice President of the PWU, dear colleagues. It is with great pleasure that I'm taking the floor here as part of the third intergenerational dialogue to wish, on behalf of the Youth Caucus and on behalf of all the Pan-African Parliament members, the most warm welcome to all our youth and this youth that is in touch today with us as parliamentarians to share our common concerns. Madam Chairperson of the AUC, Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, as you may know, each time a young person is in contact, as these 200 young Africans that are here, with personalities such as the chairperson of the AUC, the President Amadi, and ministers and parliamentarians that are here, this is a good opportunity and a special opportunity because the youth are who have noble dreams and hopes have the opportunity to break the barriers that are between them and their elders. I address you today with a double hat, the one of the chairperson of the Youth Caucus within the PAP, and also as an African citizen that shares with you the passion to endeavor for the progress and development of our youth in our continent. I would like to reaffirm the solidarity and support of PAP for the promotion of youth and empowerment of youth, and I would like to reassure our young men and women that the Pan-African Parliament takes care of their concerns, and in pursuance for Article 22 of its rules of procedures, our Parliament created the Permanent Commission on Equality, Gender, Family, Youth and Disabled and People with Disabilities and other tasks. And this committee is in charge of helping the Parliament to oversight the development of policies and activities of the African Union in relation to the youth. On the other hand, given the huge capacities of our youth to transform our continent, we as their representatives within the Pan-African Parliament have looked into the possibility accorded by Article 87 of our rules of procedures and set up a group for our youth within this committee. Our top priority is to use the unique possibilities that we have as legislators, not only to defend but also to establish into our legislations and our political frameworks inclusion and empowerment of youth in all our decision-making process and our economic and social development and democratic governance of our countries and our continent as a whole. And this will be much more easier as our parliament is becoming a fully legislative body in pursuance of the decision made by our heads of states 1 year ago in Malabo, Equatorial Guinea. Ladies and gentlemen, the theme today is promoting good governance for citizens' actions for the empowerment of young women as well as youth innovation entrepreneurship. This is the heart of our interest of our caucus, and it implies the approach that should be followed by the stakeholders in order to promote a culture of good governance in favor of the empowerment of the youth in general and young women in particular, in order to have a more committed youth and a youth with innovation entrepreneurship. But the challenge today is the environment that is complicated. Our dialogue relies on recognizing African youth not only for its demographic importance, that is, as over 40% of Africans have between 15 and 35 years old, but also their role in peace and development in the African continent. The heads of state of the African Union during the 24th session of their assembly made this effort when they insisted on the need to involve and empower the youth as part of the implementation of Agenda 2063. This is why, as a group in charge of the youth issues within the PAP, we do support unconditionally any effort that is targeted toward the education of the youth and the capacity building of the youth in order for them to take their destiny into their hands. The Agenda 2063 is an important point, an important framework for our youth, and there are initiatives among which the Charter on Youth and Architecture and AGA through the platform of African governance that is finalizing the strategy of commitment of the youth. These are frameworks, institutional frameworks that, by recognizing the importance of the youth, translate the will of the continent to take into account our youth in the development of Africa. Ladies and gentlemen, specifically speaking about the Charter on Youth, I would like to recall to the youth present here that the Charter was approved on the 2nd of July 2016 in a meeting of heads of state of government in Banjul and entered into force in August 2009. It is a political and legal instrument for African states that guides them for the empowerment and the development of the youth at the continental level, continental, regional and national levels. It aims at consolidating and reaffirming the efforts to empower the youth through significant participation of the youth and an equitable partnership in favor of the development of Africa. I would like, ladies and gentlemen, in this regard, to pay tribute to the 36 countries that have ratified the Charter, and as a group in charge of the youth, we commit ourselves to participate in the advocacy in order to fast-track the process of ratification for those who have not ratified it yet. After having recognized these laudable initiatives at the continental and regional level, we need to have a critical mind and look to these initiatives and the level of their implementation to see how to reinforce them and to improve them when necessary. It is true today that we are embarking on the third intergenerational dialogue in order to look into the role and the demands of the youth. We've retained as a field of reflection education and capacity building, participation and leadership, socioeconomic welfare, the role of the youth in conflict situation and conflict resolution by 2020. This dialogue is an important opportunity for us to express ourselves. I would like humbly to count on your expertise, your participation in the deliberations and your innovative spirit in order to help this youth be involved and participate in genuine development based on governance, the sustainability, job creation, while taking into account the emerging factors that are risky factors. I think here of the phenomenon of migration that is happening on the Mediterranean, and that recall sadly the tragedy of the slavery era. During this year, many hundreds of women, children and youth have lost their lives in the sea and in the desert. Madam Chairperson, you as a mother can only but really evaluate and assess the hardship and the sadness of the Somali, Ethiopian, Malian, Nigerian mothers that mourn their children, their girls. Who better than you, Madam Chairperson, can appreciate or can feel the tragedy and the losses from this tragedy? This is why we are asking for your support, Madam Chairperson. We are asking for your support, Madam Chairperson, because we as a Caucus on Youth are reflecting on other lines. We need our support, your support, to find solutions for the youth, because as President Ahmadi said, the youth problem is an African problem and solutions should be African solutions. PAP will propose into the African Union Commission an innovative project to fight against migration that focuses on the risks run by the youth and to bring prosperity over our continent. To conclude, Madam Chairperson, I would like to share with you these two convictions. The first one is that the youth is the age where we have more nobility and more faith that would enable us and help us to make and to realize great things. And the second one is from the speech made by Nelson Mandela in 2007, who said that education is a powerful weapon in order to evolve the mentalities and transcend the differences, and sport is a sort of tolerance and learning of respect. These two elements contribute to creating a more equitable society. Long live the African youth and long live Africa. I thank you.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. Ladies and gentlemen, the participants, you've followed the statement of the chairperson of the Pan-African Parliament, Caucus on Youth. He called upon the chairperson of the AUC, and I would like during our deliberation to invite you to give the opportunity to Dr. Dlamini-Zuma, chairperson of the African Union Commission, to deliver her statement in favor of the African youth. Madame Dlamini-Zuma would like to take the floor to give some advice to the youth. So may I now invite Madame the chairperson of the African Union Commission to address the youth. Madame Chairperson, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Program Director, Honorable Bethel Amadi, the President of the Pan-African Parliament, Honorable Buti Manamela, Deputy Minister in the Presidency of the Republic of South Africa, Honorable Asumani Issa, Chairperson of the PAP Caucus of Youth, Honorable Members of the House, Honorable Francine Muyumba, President of the Pan-African Youth Union, but more importantly, the youth that are gathered here. A very special welcome to you and all the esteemed and invited guests. I'm delighted to participate in this important gathering of African youth with other generations. Just to recall how this intergenerational dialogue started, as one of the speakers said, it started in 2013 as a way of marking the 50th anniversary. We thought we needed all generations to be in one room and discuss. But the youth who were there asked if it could be a yearly event. And we are merely responding to your request by having this intergenerational dialogue. But of course, it's taking place 2 days before we celebrate Africa Day, which Africa Day marks the birth of our Organization of African Unity, now the African Union. It is common knowledge that the precursor of the OAU was the first conference of independent African states, which was convened under the leadership of Nkrumah on 15th April 1958. At that time, there were only 8 independent African countries. Again, in December 1958, at the insistence of Nkrumah, there was a conference where 62 African nationalist organizations attended to discuss plans to harmonize, coordinate strategies for achieving political independence within the shortest period. On both occasions, Nkrumah's key message centered around the right to self-determination and the need for Africans to take their destiny in their own hands. And I want just to quote a small piece of that from Nkrumah. He said, "Freedom is not something that one people can bestow on another as a gift. They claim it as their own, and none can keep it from them," said Nkrumah, close quote. So the youth of today stand at a similar crossroads as that time. And to use Nkrumah's prism, development and empowerment and peace is not something that previous generations will bestow upon yourselves. It is for your generation to claim it. You must claim prosperity, you must claim peace, you must claim a people-centered Africa, an integrated Africa. But you don't only claim it, you work towards it and achieve it. So that's the message that we are giving you today, coming from Nkrumah, but within the context of what is happening today. You cannot say our countries have got violence. Who are carrying the guns? It's not old people going like this. It's young people. Why are you carrying guns? Why are you killing each other? For what? Instead of making sure that you are involved in developing. You can stand up against people who say you must take guns to kill your fellow nationals. For what? So it is in your hands, as Nkrumah said. The previous generation took it upon their hands. That's why we are all liberated and we are standing here. What is our own raison d'etre? What do we exist for? We have to transform our continent into a prosperous, peaceful, integrated, people-centered continent that plays a dynamic role in the world. And it is this generation that has to do it now. Whereas the youth of today, as I say, stand at this crossroads. As the older generation, we do have the responsibility to create an enabling environment so that today's young generation of young people is, as we know, the young people are the largest number in all our countries in this continent. So Africa is the youngest continent because more than 60%, 65% of African population is under 35, so they are young. This is the greatest asset we have as Africans. But of course, you have to invest in that asset. And what investments do we need to put for the youth, for them to be able to play the role I just mentioned earlier? We have to ensure that, of course, they have food, that they have health, sanitation, but more importantly, that they have the necessary education, the skills, and of course we have to ensure that we also focus a lot more on science, technology, maths, engineering, because indeed, if we made that investment in the young people, we will be able to channel their energy, their enthusiasm, their creativity, their vitality into innovation, into driving Agenda 2063. And of course, when you talk about youth, we are talking about young men and women. Madam President of the PYA, I understand your top executive has 1 woman, yourself, and 11 men. I don't think that's the type of youth organizations we need on this continent. The majority of people, and of those young people, the majority are young women. You have 1 woman out of 12, it's a travesty. But I hope that you will do a lot of work to promote both young men and women so that at the next conference we can see a change. But I hope you also have the power of co-option, because we can't wait for another conference to add a second woman to your executive. So I hope your constitution allows. Of course, the youth of today should not have to wait for someone somewhere to bring development to them, as I said. We create the enabling environment, we give you the skills, and you run the race. A recent blog penned by one Kayode Aladen from Nigeria titled Fellow Africans, the West Owes You Nothing. That blog is very interesting, by a young man. Well, I'm not sure actually, but a young person. And it goes like this, I'll just quote. I give you this. You are tough, smart, and resilient. And you have a survival instinct not seen in any other. No continent has the potential you have. No people of any other continent has been endowed like you. You have it all. Land and climate, natural resources, and a young population. But you slumber on as though you know not its value. Then you complain when others see the value and take advantage. I think that young man has summarized everything about our continent. Now when he says we slumber, he's right, we slumber. And we complain when other people take advantage. So I think he's saying we must wake up from our slumber. And that's what we have to do. It was the similar sentiments that motivated us to reach out to all spheres, sectors, and levels of society with one simple but very complex question. What Africa do you want? And it was that question that produced the first draft of Agenda 2063, when the Africans in their various formations said what Africa they want. The compendium of aspirations of Africans here and in the diaspora gave birth to Africa's Agenda 2063. We are now seized with the task of finalizing and continually improving the first 10-year plan, implementation plan, which we will present to the June summit here in Sandton. This dialogue offers an important space for young people to engage, discuss, and influence that agenda, since it will be touching on their lives, their communities, and their countries, and their continent. Since we have declared 2015 as the year of women's empowerment and development towards Africa's Agenda 2063, I hope in your engagements during these couple of days, you will pay special attention to the aspirations of young women and girls. That does not take away from the aspirations of young men. I'm just saying special attention, because the young women tend to be invisible. And that's why we don't have them even in the PYA. So we must pay special attention. The young must lead the way and present the now and the future in this regard, as well as by being examples of non-sexism in their organizations and challenge patriarchy wherever it rears its head. Honorable members and honorable youth, as our blogger said, we are a continent endowed with many advantages and resources. Of course, I've mentioned the first and the most precious resource, which is our people. The second resource, well, maybe whilst we are on that resource, I think it's important, and I hope you will discuss this, that we must move faster towards harmonization of our vocational and higher education curricula and qualifications, because this will open the way for free movement of people, of course, free movement of goods as well. Because it means you can study anywhere, work anywhere where your skills are needed, without people asking you, oh, what qualifications do you have? Oh, we don't recognize this or that. So that harmonization is very important. There is work going on that, but it's not sufficiently taken as urgently as it should, and I hope you will agitate and make sure that that harmonization happens. And of course, our development must, of necessity, include infrastructure that connects and powers the continent. Your generation, in your lifetime, must be able to, if you are in Johannesburg, to go back home to Senegal, to Maputo, to Dar, to Nairobi, to Bangui, to Kinshasa, to Nouakchott, to Addis, and to every other capital, if you so choose, by high-speed rail. That you should try and achieve in your lifetime, in your generation. We must also ensure that we connect through broadband, ICT, highways, and aviation. Flying is still difficult, better than it was when I was young, but we need to keep improving it. But there is a limit to how many flights we can put on the sky. Therefore, we must make sure that our highways are good for us to drive and connect. Our rail is good enough for us to go on the trains and connect. But we should also ensure that our future is secure for future generations by tackling climate change, developing and innovating around renewable energies. Africa's oceanic space is 3 times our landmass. Do we know how big our landmass is? Do we know? Let me see, the young people, do you know? You don't? Let me tell you how big Africa is. In Africa, you can accommodate China, you can accommodate the United States of America, you can accommodate Western Europe, and there'll still be space for Japan and other countries. But of course, the oceanic spaces are more than 3 times that. But these oceanic spaces have a lot of resources. Who is exploiting those resources in our oceanic spaces? Is it us for our benefit? I would say no. Most of the exploitation of those resources is by others who have seen the value of what that blogger talked about. So it is important that we develop our blue economy, including maritime transport. We import a lot, we export a lot. But whose transport do we use when we export or import? We use other people's transport. Who works on those in that transport? It's other people. The insurance, the whole value chain linked to that. We are not benefiting. So we need to change. Because there are many jobs associated with taking freight across the maritime highways to other continents or bringing freight to our continent. So it is in this vein, and it is a travesty that Africa, who has amongst the largest portion of unused arable land, spends billions on importing food. But of course, agriculture on the continent has been relegated to older people. Young people, how many are in agriculture? Almost none. The average age of people who work on the land today in Africa is about 50. So it's a dying trade. So it means if we don't change, we'll be importing even more food than we are today. So we need to attract young people, both into agriculture and agribusiness. But of course, we cannot attract them unless we modernize agriculture. Because I can't imagine you, cool as you are, holding a handhold hoe going like this. Can you imagine yourselves? No. So the women, during our consultations, one of the things they said to us, we must retire the handheld hoe to the Agricultural Museum. They don't want it anymore. And they want to be provided with access to modern technology. So I think we must modernize. And we must not reinvent the wheel. There are other countries that have modernized agriculture. They've used newer technologies. When you talk, people say, oh, tractors are not affordable and they can't be used everywhere. True. But there are tillers of all sizes that can be used. But that will also free the women, because a field that they will plow with a handheld hoe for 3 weeks, they can do that with a tiller in 1 day. So, and the roots can go deeper, because that handheld hoe can't go much deep in the soil. So we are launching that campaign in June. And it is in our 10-year plan that in this decade, between now and 2025, we must indeed modernize agriculture. But also we must give access to land rights, financial and extension services, irrigation, but we must also use agriculture to industrialize and agribusiness. Africa must industrialize by adding value to our natural resources, beneficiating our mineral resources. Of course, to do this, we need engineers, we need vocational training, and we need other skills that I spoke about earlier. But why is it so critical that we industrialize? You see, now we export more raw material and we import finished goods from other people. When you export raw material, you export jobs as well, because that raw material value is added, beneficiation is done with higher level jobs, and so those jobs are created in the countries where we are exporting our raw materials, not in Africa. Secondly, you export revenue, because what you export is raw materials and what you get from it. And when you import the finished goods, the price is very different. So we are the biggest exporters of jobs and revenue. But on the other side of the equation, we have lots of people unemployed. We are a very rich continent with poor people. And our riches are going out to deal with poverty in other countries. And poverty remains in Africa. So industrialization is not just a nice thing to have. It has to be done. It has to be done if we are, in the medium to long term, going to stop the tragedy that we see every year of our young people, women, children, dying in the Sahel, dying in the Mediterranean. Somebody said to me in a conversation, oh, it's because Africa doesn't have energy. They are following the lights in Europe. And I said to them, yes, they may be following lights in Europe, but in reality, they are following the jobs that we export with our raw materials. And so we have to stop that. And who best can stop it? It's you, young people. One, you have to be skilled. You have to ensure that the policies in our governments are that for industrialization. Because if not, this continent will just sink deeper. If you look at the countries that are amongst the fastest developing, some of them are doing very interesting things. I just want to quote one, which is my country, Ethiopia, where I live. You thought I was going to say South Africa? No, I live in Ethiopia. One of the things that Ethiopia has done, maybe over the past 25 years, I'm not sure, they started with about 2 or so universities. Now they have 33. In addition, they have lots of technical training places. But what do they do in these 33 universities? 70% of their intake is in science. And 40% of that 70% is in engineering. Because for industrialization, you need those skills. And you watch it. You watch that country. 20 years, watch it. Because they are doing the right thing. Other disciplines need to be trained, but to develop your economy and to industrialize, you need a lot of engineers, a lot of technologists to innovate. So if all of us can follow that route and have more institutions, but also focus a lot more on science and engineering, technology. But we are also advocating that we must also have online universities, because it's not possible to massify the number of physical institutions. If we wait for that, it will take us forever. But if we also take advantage of technology, we can quicker have our skills revolution. So we are looking at that as well. So we hope that you will support. It's not to undermine the physical institutions, but the physical institution must also have virtual space where those who cannot get into the physical can still study virtually. Let me also say that we need to silence the guns on our continent. It's not a must that there should always be a country that is where guns are blazing. But of course, the majority of countries, the guns are silent. And we must make sure that Agenda 2063 is implemented, because if we don't implement it in those countries where the guns are silent, tomorrow, when people are hungry, there are no jobs, the guns will start, or instability will start. But silencing the guns means the youth must refuse to shoot at another fellow citizen. They must refuse to kill fellow citizens for no good reason, and there's no good reason to kill a fellow citizen. Guns were meant, traditionally, guns were meant for hunting food so that people can eat. But now, of course, they are used to kill people. But on the African continent, let's silence the guns. And young people will play a very critical role in doing that. But you can't do that if you say, oh, I'm too smart to be in politics. You have to get into politics. I'm a medical doctor, but I've always been in politics, because that's where lives of people are shaped. That's where futures are shaped. And it's not mutually exclusive that if you are a professional, you can't be in politics. You should be, actually. And sometimes young people these days, they don't even register to vote. They don't even exercise. It's not just a right, it's also a responsibility to vote. And you don't exercise that right and that responsibility. And it's not acceptable. You should be part of political parties, you should be part of civil society, you should be part of everything that happens in your country. But in politics, policies are developed. In parliaments, as you know, in the executive, implementation. So you don't have to be all in parliament, but you have to be active members. Whether you work in the bank as a CA or whatever, you can still be an active person. Because you need to be agents for change. If you don't participate, how are you going to get change? So, if you continue to slumber, as the blogger said, you have yourselves to blame. But I also want to say, as part of re-energizing the Pan-African movement and ideals, we're also encouraging young people in schools, in communities, in higher education institutions, to form AU clubs, to learn and influence your continental organization and learn about each other. Yesterday, I was very excited. I was in Cape Town at UCT, and they formed an AU club there. Because when you have formed the AU club, you look at all the decisions that our governments have taken, and you can say, this they've implemented, this they've not implemented. Then we engage them. We engage the Puti Malamelas and say, why have you not, you took this decision, why has it not been implemented? Because the decisions we take are very good, but implementation is a problem. Let me give you one example. In 2000, there was an agreement on Yamoussoukro Agreement, which is an aviation agreement, how we are going to work and cooperate amongst each other, have open skies, and grow our aviation industry. This was 2000. And it was supposed to start implementation by 2002. The 2 years were supposed to do all the groundwork, all the laws, all the things, 2002. At that time, the African airlines they had 60% of the share in the aviation market in Africa. What happened? No implementation. Today, collectively, the African airlines only have 20% of the aviation market in Africa. They've lost 40% to outside airlines. And if we don't implement, in 20 years, there'll be no airlines, African airlines. They'll all be gone. Our biggest airline is Ethiopian Airline. And then the others, Kenya, South Africa, Egypt, and so on, they will all disappear unless we implement what we agreed on. There was a study done by IATA to say even if 12 countries just implemented that, they can generate 150,000 jobs amongst them. They can generate more than $1.5 billion in revenue every year. Besides that, the airlines will also grow. But we've lost. And we have 20% of the market, and it's declining. Maybe as I speak to you, because I looked at those figures early last year, maybe it's even less now. So if we don't implement, it's not just that we are not implementing, but we are actually losing. So it's up to these clubs, AU clubs, amongst the youth. And they can be intergenerational. They don't have to be just young people. They can be intergenerational. But they must follow and agitate and advocate and ask governments, why are you not implementing? We have Agenda 2063 now, all agreed. Is it going to be implemented? We hope so. But who is going to make sure that it is implemented? Of course, we are very happy that already 12 countries have asked us to help in domesticating it so that it becomes part of the DNA policies of the government. And that will guarantee implementation. We hope the others that have not yet will also do so. Other regs are also putting it in their own plans, some regs. So we are happy with that, but we need these clubs. And of course, as part of these clubs, you'll be able to send representatives to summits, we will be getting AU clubs, not PYA, unless PYA gets its act together and on this matter and get clubs that are following, working with the commission, working with everybody to follow. Because these things have happened because nobody was following. Nobody was checking what decisions have been taken and whether they've been implemented. Of course, Parliament, Pan-African Parliament is also supposed to do that. So I just want to say, from the oldest of us to the youngest, we are all future generations. And living tomorrow means that we have to make sure that the future will turn out better than today. Sometimes it looks like there is a gap between generations, and sometimes it seems much larger because you guys call yourselves tweeps or something. And the older generation don't even know what tweeps are. So, but it's not as big as you think. Because together we can do a lot more in solidarity. The older generation can bring the experience. You bring the vitality and creativity and innovation, and together we can make a great continent. We must therefore defend spaces and programs that facilitate for cooperation amongst generations, underscoring sacrifices that all present generations must make for the next generation. We are here because previous generations made sacrifices for our generation. So I believe that the youth of today are confronted with challenges which are not so dissimilar from the ones that were faced by our forebearers. So as I conclude, I want to go back where I started and quote Kwame Nkrumah as he embodies Pan-Africanism. At the inaugural meeting of the OAU, where he said, I quote, "Nothing will be of avail except the united act of a united Africa. We have already reached the stage where we must unite or sink." This must inform all of us so that these xenophobic attacks, which are deplorable that took place in this country, must never happen. We must understand that we are one people, one destiny. And it is our working together that will take us forward. Working separately and killing each other will only take us backwards. So again, like Puti, I'm very happy that the government realized that and swiftly acted. And I hope that it will not happen. So I wish you a very fruitful dialogue. I took a bit long time because I'm not going to be with you in many of your sessions. But I hope that the Festival of Ideas in the next 2 days will flourish. And I look forward to your conclusions. I thank you.
Je crois que les ovations de tout à
I
l'heure
think
témoignent
that
du fait de ce
the
que
applause
les jeunes ont compris le discours de leur mère.
testifies to the
Il n'y a plus de
fact
commentaires à faire
that the
dessus.
youth have understood
Mais
the
moi, si on
speech
me
of
posait
their
la
mother.
question de savoir
If I
qu'est-ce
was
que Madame la
asked
Présidente a dit,
to
qu'est-ce que la
say
maman a
what
dit,
Madam
je
Chairperson
dirais
said,
tout
what
simplement que le
mother
destin de
said,
l'Afrique
I
est
would
entre
say
les
that she
mains
said
de
that
sa
the
jeunesse.
destiny of
Et
Africa
je crois
is
que tout
into
le
the
monde a
hands
bien
of its
retenu.
youth, and everybody
Faites-en bon usage.
understood
Merci
this.
maman pour votre
Thank
discours.
you, mother, for
Maintenant, je
your
voudrais
speech.
appeler un jeune,
Now I would like
le
to call up
vice-président de la jeunesse
a
africaine.
young person,
Il s'agit de M. Ndaba Mandela
Mr.
pour
Ndaba
son discours.
Mandela,
Monsieur le
to deliver
vice-président, vous avez la
his
parole.
statement. You have the floor, sir.
President of the Pan-African Parliament, Her Excellency who just left, the Chairperson of the African Union Commission, Dr. Dlamini-Zuma, honorable members of Parliament, leaders and members of youth organizations, dignitaries, invited guests, ladies and gentlemen. It is indeed a privilege to stand before you today to speak on behalf of the Pan-African Youth Council during a time when the African youth have made great strides but face many challenges. A time in which we have seen African youth across the continent take a stand in pursuit of their own political hegemony. The role of the youth in nurturing Africa's development progress cannot be ignored. Africa boasts the largest proportion of youth, yet it lags behind in youth participation at national and local decision-making processes. Such questions the health of our democratic system and its ability to fulfill expectations if such a large percentage of the population are merely bystanders. When the youth are burning with the desire to change the status quo, and through platforms such as the Pan-African Youth Council, we are organizing efforts that not only reflect our talent and inventiveness, but we're also showing that we deeply understand our own problems and know how to address them with our own grown initiatives. The participation at this intergenerational dialogue demonstrates the persistence, passion, and enthusiasm that the youth have in ensuring its participation in governance. It is essential that we continue to challenge the norms and structures that exclude us from engaging with the state and demanding good governance. We are the hope for Africa. As Ghana's first president and the greatest advocate of Pan-Africanism, Kwame Nkrumah once said, "On our youth depends the future of Africa and the continent's total liberation and unity." As the youth, we need to continue to exercise our right to participate and develop the knowledge, skills, and confidence to affect positive change. We need to redefine and deepen the links between us, young citizens, and the state. We are vibrant, dynamic, and creative core of society. As we drive for youth participation in governance, let us utilize what we have. Technology and popular culture as a weapon that will enable us to be positive contributors in all aspects of real development, to promote our individual, personal, social, economic, political, and civic development. Over the past few years, the world witnessed various political springs sprung by the youth in countries like Tunisia and Egypt, as well as others. Technology and popular culture were used to organize, communicate, and raise awareness. The recent 2015 presidential elections that took place in Nigeria was the most technology-influenced election in the history of Nigeria. The election was won and lost on social media, even before the citizens got to the polls, ballot papers. The saturation rate of smartphones positively impacted the political race and equipped young citizens with a persuasive medium to truthfully tell the story. Our political participation is fundamental to nation building, economic growth, and stability. The lack of youth political participation and governance has its consequences. A case in point is the reaction of the youth in current crisis in Burundi and Libya. Let us continue to advocate for youth participation in governance, and the demand that our voice be heard in a peaceful manner. To the youth across the continent of Africa, whether you're working on an NGO, a business, or sitting at home simply because of the lack of opportunity that exists in employment, opportunities, and the resource mobilization at your disposal. Like Madam Zuma said, now is the time to unite our efforts to push for active participation in leadership structures as well as the empowerment agenda. As the old African proverb says, if you think you are too small to make a difference, then surely you haven't spent a night with the mosquito. Dream big. Together we can achieve anything. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank
La
you very
jeunesse doit
much.
rêver grand et vous
Youth
allez
should
réaliser
have
vos objectifs.
big
Je vous remercie,
dreams.
Monsieur le Président.
I thank you
Maintenant, je
very
voudrais
much,
appeler
President. Now
sur
let me
cette tribune
invite
Madame Francine Muyumba,
Madame
qui est
Francine
la
Muyumba,
présidente de l'Union
that is the
panafricaine de la
President
jeunesse,
of
son
the Pan-African
discours.
Union for Youth Union, to deliver her statement.
Madame Muyumba.
Madame Muyumba, you have the floor.
C'est fini? C'est fini? Nous attendons l'intervention de Madame Muyumba, qui est
Expecting
la présidente.
Madame Muyumba, who is the
l'Union
President of the
panafricaine de la
Pan-African
jeunesse.
Youth
Madame, you have the floor.
Union.
I thank you. You have the floor, Madame.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, now the speech has to change because most of the things were directed to the chair. However, tomorrow we shall be able to come back and, of course, address accordingly this August Assembly. Honorable President of the Pan-African Parliament, I think he's still outside. Honorable members of the Parliament, dear youth leaders, distinguished invited guests, ladies and gentlemen, it is my great pleasure on behalf of the African youth to firstly thank the African Union Commission, in particular, Her Excellency Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma and the Pan-African Parliament for hosting this prestigious intergenerational dialogue, which aims at exploring the role of lawmakers and legislators in delivering on Agenda 2063, as well as promoting youth development and empowerment. We believe that this dialogue will be a significant gateway in understanding and appreciating major issues faced by the continent and its youth, and proposing innovative solutions to targeted objectives. The Pan-African Youth Union in the past 6 months has made significant transformations, including developing a strong communication link between the youth on the African continent, the diaspora and youth of the world at large. Honorable members, we have managed to hold a bilateral meeting with All China Youth Federation in Arusha, Tanzania, at the Africa-China Young Leaders Forum in order to strengthen friendship, cooperation and development. We have also managed to hold meeting with European Youth Forum in Kenya, and of course also connect with the Office of the Secretary General of the United Nations through his envoy on youth. In order for us to defend and promote the rights of African youth, and an invitation in this regard was extended to the full Pan-African Youth Union Executive Committee to attend the high-level meeting on youth at the United Nations in New York. In regard to the meeting, PYU has requested all member states of the African Union to include youth representatives in their delegations, for youth-related issues cannot be discussed without the youth. Prior to this meeting, the Pan-African Youth Union managed to score a meeting with all African youth representatives and the UN Secretary General Envoy on Youth, as well as potential partners who will be attending this event, in order to strengthen the participation of African youth at all levels. In the same vein, the Pan-African Youth Union was honored to be invited to this year's World Women's Summit in Sao Paulo, Brazil, as a speaker, and seized the opportunity to strengthen our relations with the youth of Brazil through the support of the authorities of Brazil. We also managed to meet the President of Senate of Brazil, and of course developed ways in which we can work together with the youth of this country. Allow me, honorable members of Parliament, to also inform you that Her Excellency Chairperson of the that the Pan-African Youth Union has become competitive in addressing youth-related issues in the world, and this year will be co-chairing the Millennium Campus Conference to be held at the UN headquarters and lead 54 African student leaders from the 54 member states of African Union to exchange with the students of the world and youth leaders at large. We are also exploring ways of resource mobilization, and through the Parliament, we are hereby requesting all member states to ensure that they pay their statutory contributions through a more credible bank account that has been established. Through the support of Her Excellency Chairperson of the African Union Commission, we have also been working closely with the AUC and the Youth Division, whereby we have developed strategic ways of collaborating with the objectives of implementing African Union youth policies. In the interest of inclusiveness, honorable members, youth leaders, distinguished invited guests, in the interest of inclusiveness, the Pan-African Youth Union has developed a mechanism of identifying young African professionals and leaders of civil society's organization as advisors in response to African youth with the Pan-African Youth Union. The PYU's main target is to provide concrete proposals to issues facing the continent, particularly on youth-related matters, as our mandate dictates. Honorable members, we recognize the Pan-African Parliament and its parliamentarians' responsibility in lawmaking, representation, appropriation, and oversight. In this regard, the Pan-African Parliament will assist our cause in ensuring the ratification of various instruments central to youth development, the appropriation of responsibilities to ensure adequate resourcing for national mechanisms and programs, the oversight of those responsibilities to monitor the implementation of these commitments at member state level. Honorable President, the youth of Africa are appreciative of their responsibilities and has a breakaway from the past. The young people are strongly committed to engage and lead the process for youth development on the continent. In this vein, our recommendations will be shared during the sessions by our representatives. We'll clearly highlight those areas that we support and aspire to engage. Prior to this dialogue, Honorable President, honorable members of Parliament, distinguished invited guests, a consultative meeting of youth leaders from across the continent was convened to discuss and agree on the key issues that we require this dialogue to address, while the details of our deliberations will be outlined during the various sessions. Honorable President, we take the opportunity to share with you at this esteemed House the following key recommendations of the youth. The youth appeal for the African Union Commission to establish a youth directorate as the value of youth engagement will be more appreciated and visible if there is an enhanced coordination of AU's activities on youth and the implementations of the African Union youth policies. mainstreamed and aligned to various developmental initiatives of the continent. The youth acknowledged the need to establish a continental youth development fund to support youth development programs on the continent, reflecting on the successful mobilization of the Ebola support response. We believe that the same model can be applied to mobilize support and assistance to the operationalization of Youth Development Fund. This fund will provide, Honorable President, ready-made resources for the implementation of various youth programs and initiatives with clear, deliverable, and outputs. The youth of Africa further advocate for ECOSOC representation, both at African Union and the United Nations level. We believe through the existing structures of the AU, the youth can be supported, guided, and nurtured to play significant roles in the AU and UN ECOSOC. On our continent, Honorable President, our continent has made tremendous strides over the last decades, particularly in deepening democratization and improving our economies. Nonetheless, the reality is that much more needs to be done by member states, the regional economic communities, development partners, and most especially the youth. We thank all the South African youth that worked closely with us in the fight against xenophobia, in promoting Pan-Africanism, values of Ubuntu, and protecting our African identity. The recent fatalities from attempted migration and terrorism reflect the gravity of the task that lies ahead of us. We condemn once again the Garissa University attacks, and we continue to appeal for concrete interventions and unity of African member states in overcoming these challenges. In conclusion, we are confident that the future of this continent is bright and we will not be deterred by challenges of today. Increasingly in Africa, young people and breaking the glass ceiling in politics, business, creative, and art, and numerous other fields, these young people are torch barriers and guarantee that tomorrow is brighter than today. The youth believe that the proposal we bring forward today will contribute to ensure that this generation has the responsibility to address social, political, and economic inequalities. We hope our proposal will gain sufficient traction, bearing in mind that the Commission is establishing the first 10-year implementation plan for the Agenda 2063. Thank you very much. I'm being told I shouldn't forget women in PYU. So I just want to share something small. Yesterday when we were with the young people, then we were saying we are going to guess 3 or 4 things that the chair will say: silencing the guns and the representation of women. So it is the challenge of our generation. We are going to make sure that in PYU we have young women. I thank you.
Thank you, Madam President. And now, give me the opportunity to give the floor to Honorable Bethel Amadi, who is the boss of the chamber here. He is the Pan-African President. Mr. President, you have the floor.
Your Excellencies, my colleagues, members of the Bureau, honorable members of Parliament, the President of the PYU, Vice President of the Pan-African Youth Council, distinguished invited guests, the young people of Africa, ladies and gentlemen, let me, on behalf of the Pan-African Parliament, welcome you to this very important dialogue taking place in the hallowed chambers of the Pan-African Parliament. The Pan-African Parliament was an institution envisioned by the founding fathers of our union to provide for African people and their grassroots organizations, including the youths of Africa, the women of Africa, the civil societies, the NGOs, the ordinary man and woman in the streets of the cities, villages, nooks and crannies of our continent, to provide them a platform to make an input in the decision-making process affecting how do we find solutions to the many challenges facing our continent. So this is the People's Parliament, and we have endeavored over the years of our existence to be a voice for the voiceless millions of African citizens, to reach out to all shades of opinion on our continent and provide them an opportunity to intervene in the decision-making process. The Pan-African Parliament has evolved over the years. At first, we were given advisory and consultative functions only. But we were not consulted, and nobody listened to our advice. So we pursued the transformation of our parliament to give us legislative functions. And after 5 years of rigorous negotiations, the heads of states and government approved the new protocol for the Pan-African Parliament last year, designating it as the legislative organ of the African Union and giving us the main function of developing draft model laws in key areas that will be agreed to, that will help build a platform for the integration process of our continent. That process is now undergoing various stages of ratification, and we're hopeful that over the next few years we will achieve full ratification of the new protocol that will usher in new Pan-African parliamentarians who will be full-time parliamentarians, who would not be members of the national parliaments, who will be truly able to devote the time, energy and resources as needed to tackle the problems facing our continent. And I hope that in each national delegation that will come after the new protocol, we would have a youth representative in each national delegation. Your Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, Africa's agenda for 2063 is committed to empowering our young people as innovators and as entrepreneurs. So the outcome of the 2013 Intergenerational Dialogue held on the margins of our 50th anniversary of our union further emphasized the need to involve and empower young people in the development and implementation of a continent-wide Agenda 2063. So this meeting and dialogue is convened with a view to harnessing additional inputs from our young people. The realization before us today is that over 65% of Africa's population are young people under the age of 35 years. And a recent study done by UNICEF, which is titled Generation 2030 Africa, projects that by the year 2050, Africa's overall population will double in size, reaching 2.4 billion. And also, by the year 2050, Africa's under 18 population will be 1 billion. The 2050 is far away. In 10 years' time, 1/4, 25% of the universal population of young people will be living in Africa 10 years from now. And we are convinced at the Pan-African Parliament that Africa's growing youth population presents an unprecedented opportunity and a potential that can be tapped into for rapid economic development of our continent. If we're able to tap into this dividend and minimize the challenges that mainly result from youth unemployment, we should, as a continent, meaningfully engage our youths in the economic and political development of our continent. Let me borrow from a statement made by the late President of the United States, President J.F. Kennedy, while taking his oath of office. And he said, a society that does not pay homage and respect to its youths is a society adrift. It's a giant headed to the rocks. If we are to realize Africa's dream of attaining high levels of economic, social, and political development, then we have to acknowledge the fact that our young people are like the suckers in the banana bunch that we need to nurture, to groom, so they can bear fruit and take over the mantle of leadership in developing our continent when we all become too old and too feeble to contribute to the African dream. As one of the organs of the African Union, the Pan-African Parliament has continued to play its role advocating for the inclusiveness of youths in the governance process. We are convinced that the youths are a key demographic segment that will ensure the future of our continent. Even though we have had this age-long saying that the youths are the leaders of tomorrow, but I believe that contrary to that view, that our youths are the true barometers on how we can gauge the social, economic, and political dynamics of our various countries and even our continent. Throughout Africa's history, the young people have played an indisputable role that has defined our destiny. I'm sure many of you recall many of our great leaders of our continent as old men who were presidents of their countries. But let me remind you that many of them took up the mantle of leadership, especially in the fight against colonialism and the fight for independence, at a very tender age. And there were youths like you. There was a young Nnamdi Azikiwe that engineered the movement in Nigeria, a young Leopold Senghor of Senegal, a young Samora Machel in Mozambique, a young Julius Nyerere in Tanzania, a young Patrice Lumumba in the Congo, a young Kwame Nkrumah in Ghana, and even in South Africa, it was a young Nelson Mandela that started the fight with his compatriots against apartheid. I therefore want to encourage you today to take your place of pride in the governance of our society. Don't wait to be leaders of tomorrow. Rather, be leaders of today. Arise, the young men and women of Africa, and start serving from now. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I believe that one of the major issues that we need to do today is to provide for this large youth population education, increase the access to quality education, increase access to health care for our young people, for skills acquisition, create opportunities for their entrepreneurial skills to be harnessed, and create opportunities for employment for our young people. And this we can do by increasing, even within our continent, possibilities of intra-Africa trade. Today, trade between African countries is as low as 10 or 12%. We would rather trade with Europe, Asia, or America. But in Europe, trade amongst themselves is 60% and still growing. Her Excellency, the Chair of the Commission, in her speech, spoke about the Yamoussoukro Agreement, of the Open Skies Agreement for the aviation sector. It is easier to travel from Africa to Europe than to travel from one African capital to another. Sometimes we even travel from Africa to Europe to come back to the next African capital. The number of international airlines operating on our continent has, over the last 20 years, gone up by 48%. They are taking from us resources. They are taking from us jobs that's meant for our young people. They don't pay taxes here. They fly in, they pick up African passengers who pay exorbitant rates. The most expensive air routes are in Africa. For a similar distance of travel within Africa compared to Europe or Europe to America, you find that the rates here are punitive. They have no investments here. They employ 2-3 African citizens in their sales office, and they cut away billions of dollars out of our continent back to build their economies. Africa continues to export raw materials, and we've heard it over and over again, that the raw materials we export are in reality African jobs for our young people. And of course, the unemployment on our continent has its attendant effects. And that is being seen clearly in the Mediterranean, which has become a graveyard for young Africans. I led a delegation from the Pan-African Parliament to the European Parliament early in the month to dialogue with them on how can we help to stop these deaths of our citizens, our young men and women who are risking life and limb to cross into Europe in search of greener pastures. We went because we believe that there could be short-term solutions in saving the lives of our citizens. There will be medium-term solutions in finding out why are they leaving, what are the root causes of this drift, and in long-term solutions on how can we, as leaders, as lawmakers, put in place a legislative framework that will ease legal migration for young Africans who are seeking knowledge, education, and skills. I had the opportunity also during that visit to visit some of the camps where they are holding the immigrants. And in one of the encounters, somebody said to me that it was easier and better for them to die trying to get to Europe than to live in their villages in shame, in hunger, in poverty, and watching their mothers and brothers and sisters die of simple diseases that cure has been found for years ago. What is it that drives the African youth to take this very dangerous mission? Why our leaders have failed to provide for them opportunities at home that will enable them live a meaningful life? Why have we continued to have conflicts even when they are unnecessary? And the conflicts continue to drive our young people to continue to search for greener pastures. We believe that the time has come where our youths will take their place of pride and be fully engaged in the march to develop our continent, but they must be given the proper foundation, adequate opportunities to participate in the search for a greater continent. At our Pan-African Parliament, we have created a youth caucus which is our parliamentary caucus for intervention on youth issues. And interestingly, it's open to all members of parliament irrespective of age, who are interested in youth issues. We will continue as a parliament and an institution of African people to identify with the plight of the African youth. We will continue to partner with the African youth and encourage them to make their contribution in the process of our social transformation. We believe that the frustration that is being exhibited by our youths is a direct result of the social situation they find themselves in. But we think that their energies can be better directed. At the same time, we also notice a lot of indifference and inaction from our youths. Madam Chair of the Union mentioned that many youths are not registered to vote. Many are not participating in the political process in their various countries. Many seem removed. But unless you engage, change will not come. We said that 65% or more of our population are youths. So you have power, you have voting power, you have energy, you have modern technology, you have communication. You can determine the future of our continent. You can make our leaders more accountable. But you need to organize yourselves. You need to be able to plan together. You need to have the ability to work together so that you can make a meaningful intervention in the process. We believe that inaction, indifference, or silence on the part of the youth in matters that, interestingly, affect them is not the way forward for our continent. And therefore, platforms such as this can be used for youth sensitization and development of a culture in our youths to effectively contribute in our search to finding solutions to the many, many problems and challenges facing our continent. It's been said over and over and over again, and I want to repeat it here for emphasis, that Africa is a resource-rich continent, but unfortunately, a rich continent of poor people. Average African citizen, be they in a village in the Niger Delta, or in Soweto, Nairobi, in Cairo, in any of our villages, are asking from our leaders the same thing. Education for their children, health care for their families, a roof over their head, food on their table, a job that pays them a living wage, and an opportunity to pursue their life's ambitions in a peaceful, safe environment. And I say to you today that the future and the present of what Africa becomes is how much you contribute as young leaders. I welcome you and thank you and wish you fruitful deliberations. God bless you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. We are now at the end. Some announcement. We have a photo session and tea break. It's 11 o'clock. I think we will be back at 20 minutes past 11. The session is adjourned. I thank you very much for your kind attention. Thank you. The photo session is out of the house, in the front, directly. Thank you.